Since free agency isn't far away, we know fair and well most GMs are going to want to free up some cap space and efforts to gain more flexibility. However, there's some contracts that we're going to go over today that are going to be rather difficult to move, since each player listed hasn't been able to play to the standards that they once did and would be more likely to be bought out and traded. You could classify them as being dead weight. In this video, we're going to be going over a select number of players that fell short last season and unfortunately haven't been earning their keep. And with that, here are 4 NHL players that have become dead weight. Today, if you didn't know Sean Monahan's past, it'd be rather puzzling to try and figure out as to why a player that's making $6.375 million a season is playing on the 4th line. Well, if we were to backtrack just a little, Monahan's future was actually pretty bright, say about 9 years ago. After earning due recognition through the Ontario Hockey League, Monahan was drafted 6th overall, drafted ahead of players such as Jake Getzel, Pavel Buchnevich, UC Saros, and several other talents. Monahan was expected to be an integral piece of Calgary's rebuild. Since Calgary had recently drafted winger Johnny Gaudreau, Monahan was thought to be, in the most optimistic terms, the ideal number 1 center that the team needed for the future. And really, you could say that for a while, Monahan met those expectations. Unfortunately though, after he notched 82 points in 78 games played during the 2018-19 campaign, which was the best season of his career mind you, he started showing signs of decline. Usually when a player takes such a deep dive into mediocrity at such a young age, it has to do with one thing: injuries. Yes, at age 27, you could say that Monahan should be in the prime years of his career. However, after a lingering wrist injury, broken thumb, and hip surgery, hockey hasn't been kind to Monahan's body one bit. Despite this though, Monahan's contract that he signed in 2016 isn't set to expire until next year. Since Brad Treliving had no real way to foresee his player's eventual decline, he agreed to terms with Monahan and added in a modified no trade clause for the next 3 seasons of his deal, meaning that even if there was a team interested in taking on the cap hit, Monahan still has a 10-team no-trade list that's in effect making it even more difficult to get rid of his deal. With only 23 points recorded last season, we can only assume that Monahan will finish out his contract with Calgary either with this team or through a buyout. Around the same time as the San Jose Sharks were wrapping up their season last month, multiple reports came through that echoed the same thing, that the Sharks were open to trading Erik Karlsson and had been shopping the defenseman prior to. NHL insider Elliotte Friedman gave his thoughts on the news, while also referencing Brent Burns, by saying, "Now, I don't necessarily think that that's going to go anywhere, but what I do think is that the Sharks recognize having 2 elite Norris Trophy winning right shot defensemen hasn't always meshed as well as the team would have hoped." While summing things up with his usual finesse, Friedman was stating the obvious here, that San Jose realizes that they're severely overpaying 2 defensemen that used to be worth what they're being paid. Honestly though, we could say here that Karlsson especially hasn't scratched the surface when it comes to living up to the $11.5 million price tag. Pretty much like Sean Monahan, Karlsson was once a much better player. In fact, you could easily say that at one time, he was one of the best defenders league-wide. Dynamic skater, amazing on the power play, and extremely capable at both ends of the ice. Unfortunately though, after he arrived in San Jose, Karlsson was never the same. Even still, what remains is the 7-figure-a-year salary that the defenseman is owed regardless. Add in a full no-move clause until 2027, and you've got yourself an almost impossible contract to erase from the books. Buyout? Maybe, but it still would cost the team either way. Honestly though, it's not like Karlsson's the worst defenseman out there, it's just that 35 points in 50 games played will never scream $11.5 million in salary. Maybe if you're Roman Josi, but this version of Karlsson anyways isn't living up to the number. Speaking of a 7-figure salary, Sergei Bobrovsky is entering the midway point of his massive 7-year, $70 million deal himself. Similarly to Karlsson, prior to receiving a pay raise, the netminder was once distinguished as the best at his position. Well, to be exact, Bobrovsky actually received the Vezina Award twice while he was playing for Columbus. Unfortunately, however, almost as soon as Bob took the reins in net for Florida, he didn't seem like the same goalie from before, as Bobrovsky went from making more saves and recording better numbers to barely recording a .900 save percentage during his debut season as a Panther. And really, he has improved in the past couple seasons, making his contract a little less of an albatross. But even still, that doesn't mean that Florida doesn't regret their decision. As according to Elliot Friedman in an article I'll reference below, GM Bill Zito has already tried to trade the goaltender, however, hasn't had any luck in doing so. Even if he was able to draw any interest, Bobrovsky still has a full no move clause in effect until 2024, when it turns into a modified no trade clause, making it a little easier to move. Since we don't know if Bob would agree to waive his clause, we can only assume that either he gets bought out or he finishes the extent of his contract in the Sunshine State, because it'd be nearly impossible to move. Throughout his tenure with the Columbus Blue Jackets, Nick Foligno was a key piece when it came to the team's overall functioning, and when he was brought in from Toronto, the idea was that he would fit in perfectly with the boys' club in Boston. Despite this, though, things haven't exactly went as planned for the forward in Beantown. After signing a 2-year, $7.65 million contract with the B, Foligno entered the 2021-22 campaign as a shell of his former self. Don't get me wrong, I love Foligno as a player, and he definitely provided some valuable intangibles and physicality, but as far as point production was concerned, he had the worst season of his entire career. And when a player notably is struggling, the usual product of that is lowered ice time. While playing on the fourth line for Boston for most of the season, Foligno was only able to record just 2 goals in 64 games played. However, it wasn't like he didn't try. After 99 shot attempts, Foligno hit the net just twice throughout. Taking all of this into context, the likelihood of Don Sweeney being able to move the contract without retaining salary seems pretty low. Knowing that Foligno is set to be paid another $3.8 million for next season, the only way out for Sweeney seems to be a buyout at this point in time.